Rental arbitrage or Airbnb management? Which one is more profitable and which one should you get into if you're looking to get into either of these industries? If you're curious about what you could be making with an Airbnb management company or with rental arbitrage, stay tuned and I hope you guys enjoy. What is going on YouTube? My name is Robert. I'm a 21-year-old rental arbitrage host in the Midwest. What I want to share with you guys today is an insightful breakdown of what is a better opportunity for those of you who are curious to get started. Now, the reason I'm addressing the home sharing management and the Airbnb management company is because I feel like that's a very popular thing as of right now because of Tai Lopez. He's sort of the father of online marketing and he's introduced this new idea January 1st, 2019, I believe that was the first time he introduced this idea to, people out there who are curious about it. What he essentially does, he markets this opportunity that you can go out there and start managing other homeowners' Airbnbs for a percentage of the Airbnb revenue. This is going to be a brief overview of both business models and the pros and cons that come along with them. If you're looking for an answer, stay tuned until the end of the video and you will not be disappointed. For those of you guys who don't know, Airbnb rental arbitrage allows you to acquire a property through a lease agreement and host it on Airbnb. Now this is a pretty well-known thing, I think, as of right now. A lot of you guys are more familiar with this concept. So just so you guys understand what the Airbnb management company model looks like, you're essentially managing a landlord's Airbnb listing for a percentage of his revenue. If we dive into these a little deeper, you'll see that the rental arbitrage method generates more cash flow and is more profitable than the management company. The average Airbnb management pay is roughly 8% to 12% of the revenue. Now, of course, you can negotiate that. That's not a set percentage. You could work on that with the landlord and figure something out. Maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be less, who knows? But essentially, you're getting a percentage of the gross revenue for managing his listing. To get started with an Airbnb management company, you're going to have to find a landlord that will allow you to manage his Airbnb listing. I'm sure there's some form of negotiation where you find the landlord who doesn't have his property that's on Airbnb, because for the most part, anyone who already has a property that's on Airbnb, they probably don't need somebody to come help them manage that for a percentage of the revenue, if that makes sense. So what you'll have to do, you'll have to find a landlord who's never been exposed to this market. You have to convince him to list his property on Airbnb and to let you manage it. So that's pretty much the way it works. So the reason that rental arbitrage is different is because you find the landlord and you negotiate a deal with him to let you host on Airbnb out of his property, but essentially you guarantee him the rent as collateral. So you're letting him know that you're gonna give him his rent every single month, whether you profit or you lose, he's getting his rent. So many of you guys may be wondering, why wouldn't a landlord just list the property and manage it on Airbnb themselves? Most landlords, you'll find, they don't typically want to steer away from what they already know. Most landlords know how to traditionally cash flow properties. They don't know much about this new home sharing market, and that'll be a lot of learning on their end. For the landlords who've been doing it for a while, the way that they know, that's the way that they know they can cash flow, and they don't want to experiment with something new and something different. On the other hand, a lot of landlords have already started hosting on Airbnb with their own properties. And I've spoken to a lot of these people and they're doing very well and they enjoy it, and that's simply it. So moving forward, let's talk about startup costs. The startup cost for an Airbnb management company is relatively low. I don't see it going very high. Simply get your legal papers, do that, whatever that costs you. I know it varies from state to state. It could cost you up to $300, it could cost you up to $900, depending on where you're at. So creating an entity, getting all that figured out on the legal aspect of things, that could cost some money. And from what I'm taking, the Airbnb management company requires the landlord to list the property. So the landlord's making the initial investment. He's buying the furniture, he's buying the amenities, he's getting the place listed, and you're just managing it for him. Vice versa, on the Airbnb rental arbitrage side, you're the one who's forking out the cash and buying all the amenities, buying all the furniture. The startup cost for rental arbitrage is realistically somewhere from $4,000 to $6,000 depending on where you're at. Now this can go upwards to $8,000. I've heard of people going that expensive. I personally did it with $3,800. So it is a little bit more cash intensive. It costs a little bit more money for you to get started. But at the end of the day, you're making more money because you're not just getting an 8% cut of the revenue. You're keeping whatever profits are left over after expenses. So that brings me to the next point, how much you're gonna make. So typically with the Airbnb management company, you'll be making anywhere from 8 to, I would say 12%, maybe 15% of the monthly revenue. Just for a quick example, the property does $2,000 a month in revenue. You get 10% of that, and that comes out to $200 a month for the property. And on the rental arbitrage aspect, you get 100% of the revenue. That's all yours. That's all under your business. That's all under your operation. It has nothing to do with the landlord. and therefore you cover expenses and you're left with whatever is left net profit. And I've made a video talking about my net profit on my Airbnb business, like the rental arbitrage aspect of it, and you guys can check that out in the card above. And therefore you guys can go look at that, review my numbers, look at what potential profits are to be made there, and that leaves you with the question, which one would you rather do? Because essentially you're doing the same amount of work. If you're managing an Airbnb listing for rental arbitrage or for a management company, you're putting in the same amount of effort, the same amount of work. When you have a listing on Airbnb, you're typically going to deal with a few things. You're gonna have to do the cleaning service, or you're gonna have to clean yourself. You're gonna have to deal with booking guests and managing the calendar. And you're gonna have to deal with a few things like checking guests in. There's a few moving pieces to having an Airbnb listing that is required from both of these ventures. So therefore, if you're gonna go out there and manage someone's Airbnb, you're putting in the same amount of work that you would be doing the rental arbitrage method. So therefore, you decide whether or not you wanna be doing the same amount of work for less pay. Essentially, with an Airbnb management company, you're getting less pay, but there's also less risk involved. With rental arbitrage, you obviously have the risk of going under on the month. Let's say you don't, for whatever reason, let's say you don't make rent or you don't cover expenses. So for whatever reason, if that happens, you're stuck with an L, or you're stuck with a loss on the month. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense to you guys. And I hope you guys can see that very clearly. So let's go into the pros of having an Airbnb management company. You don't have to start with as much cash. That is the first thing that I can obviously look at. And all you have to do is essentially convince the landlord or the property owner that you're going to manage his Airbnb listing. The thing that's tricky for me with this whole entire management company method is, if there's truly a property owner who wants to list his property on Airbnb, why does he need you in the equation? And that's simply, obviously some homeowners don't want to deal with the management side of it, but at the same time, you'll have to prove yourself of value. You'll have to prove that you're worth something to him, so therefore he can take his property off the traditional rental market and list it on the home sharing market. And keep in mind, with this method, there's obviously regulation. There's very strict regulations in place that you'd have to get through in order for the landlord. Let's say, like, you find the landlord, you say, hey, your property's on the market for rent, you're not doing very well with it traditionally, I can help you out. All you have to do is furnish it and take it off the traditional marketplace and deal with the regulations. And that's sort of a lot to look at. Just from my perspective, that's a lot to deal with. On the rental arbitrage aspect of it, takes a lot of that responsibility and puts it on you instead of the homeowner. So the homeowner is not dealing with anything. He's dealing with a traditional long-term tenant, essentially, because he's getting his long-term tenant pay every single month. And his property is being used, obviously, for short-term rentals, but that doesn't really affect him at all. Like, he could be on the other side of the world and that wouldn't really involve him whatsoever. Obviously, there's ways to do it. I'm not an expert. I'm just giving you guys a brief opinion from my perspective. Another con that I see is that at any moment, let's say the landlord is done with you, like, he sees the way that the Airbnb is cash flowing and he thinks he can do it himself. He thinks he doesn't need you in place to manage it for him. He could easily kick you out the door, and there you're stuck with nothing. You'll have to find another landlord who's willing to work with you. It's a very difficult process as far as getting that started. I think it's a little bit more difficult than actually doing rental arbitrage, because what you're doing, you're putting a lot more responsibility on the landlord, on the homeowner. That leaves a lot of it out of your hands, out of your control. This depends a lot on the owner of the property listing it and putting a lot of money into something that he may potentially not want to do. Maybe he realizes halfway through the process that, hey, I don't really want to do this, it's too much cash, etc. Another con of the home sharing management company or the Airbnb management company is that you're making less money for the same amount of work. That's definitely a con in my opinion. So one way to get around this is actually the rental arbitrage method. You'll be making a lot more money for the same amount of effort. Obviously, the results are relative to location and to wherever you're at. One more time, just to recap, the pros of an Airbnb management company is obviously less cost upfront. That is obviously a pro for those of you guys who want to get started. And a con is you make less money for the same amount of work you'd be doing with rental arbitrage. Let's move into the pros and cons of rental arbitrage. You need a lot more money to start. So if money's an issue for you, either of these two things will have their weight, obviously, on the decision you end up going with. And so it costs a lot more money, and you're taking on a lot of risk by signing the lease agreement. You're taking on potentially losing money at the end of the month and still having to pay out of pocket to cover that expense. You're gonna have to learn how to manage cash flow on paper very wisely, because you're gonna have to have a lot of expenses that come out of your gross revenue. I don't wanna dive into the details of the gross revenue and the net profit. I've already done that in a video, so I can save my breath on that. But what I think it's just an obstacle in the rental arbitrage method is that you have that large expense of rent. And with home management company, you don't. So there's something that you guys can look at there. An absolute pro of Airbnb rental arbitrage is that you are keeping a lot more money at the end of the month for the same amount of work that you'd be doing with the management company. If you guys agree with me, that's cool. If not, it's my opinion. Once again, thank you guys so much for staying tuned. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like on it and smash that subscribe button. I go through all the comments, I read every single comment, so you guys should leave me a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. If you haven't joined my Facebook group, Airbnb Mastery through Rental Arbitrage, be sure to join that Facebook group if you are interested.